So let's start. And my name is Tanja, and I want to make HR in game development great again. I know that the majority of you disrespect and maybe hate HR managers and recruiters. And maybe sometimes I do the same. But I also do respect and love the HRs and recruiters that are professional. I'm from the development side originally. For several years, I've been a chief operating officer of a successful game development company. And then I was the head of Playrix at Kyiv office. Later on, I decided to set up my own team that would consult the game dev companies on how to make good processes in HR, employer branding, recruiting. We hire teams, set up new offices, and consult individuals on how to promote their career. And one of the questions that really bothers me is the role of talent managers in a game development studio. On the side of the C-level management and owners and founders, on the side of the teams, and especially on the side of the HR managers themselves. So what's wrong with HR in game development? We are a young industry, and it impacts everything. It is mismanagement and poor management. It is the immaturity of processes. It is the focus on games only and not on the way these games are created and the way that you build your teams and add new members into your team. Talent managers are very often occasional people, not professionals. They're someone good because most of top managers tend to think that HR is something simple. It's just cooking, it's just writing emails and making coffee or something like that. Employees disrespect not only the recruiters as specialists, but such roles and the functions itself. And from all the sides, from the C-level management, from the teams, and from the recruiters, we find poor understanding of what a complex thing it is to manage people. And to manage people who are the core value of the game development company, because when we have something like M&A and so on, we do not sell products. We sometimes sell install base, but the core thing that is sold if you are a game development company is the expertise which belongs to your employees and to the team. What's wrong with, by the way, I tried to make a playlist for you to imagine what sad songs usually sound when I think about HR and recruiting. So what's wrong with the recruiters? First of all, they lack strategy. They do not know the strategy of the company, and very often there is no strategy of the company. And they do not influence it, and they do not want to influence it. The next thing is the vision of the C-level managers, founders, is very narrow. They consider HR just a very simple thing, and from the perspective of an employee, of what is happening to them as an employee, and not how they can influence the whole company with this. I often find that people do not know the difference between a recruiting specialist and an HR. Call all of them HR, but they really differ. Recruiting is how you get people into the company, and the HR is what happens with all of them inside the company until they leave. What I also see is that recruiter very often is a copy-paste manager who just sends tons of letters, pays no attention to candidates, doesn't build good processes inside the team, and really spoils the employer's brand with poor management. And as for HR manager, it's a good girl someone who is always ready to help, to make you some coffee, organize an event, and fire people because managers do not like firing people, and HR can always do this. But what I also know is that every company deserves the recruiting and HR managers that they hired. And if you have a bad HR, blame yourself only. Your HR is a mirror, and his professionalism is just the way you can manage the company. Because imagine, when there is no HR manager or HR director, who is the role playing the HRD? It is the CEO of the company. He is the HR manager. And if you have a bad HR manager, it's only your fault. Why does it happen? So we have something like this iceberg. Just a moment. Yeah. Something like this iceberg. And most of people, they think that it's only about this on the top. On the perspective of an employee. Just, we've seen that the vacancy has been somehow promoted. We had some mailing, good or bad, with the recruiter. We ran some tests and tech interview, received an offer. Well done if it was a written one. At least some kind of onboarding. Happily, if we had the dust cleaned on the keyboard from the previous employee who worked there. We had or had not some kind of adaptation. Maybe we had some way of evaluation and development, and then we were somehow dismissed or left the company ourselves, and that's it. Yeah, this is just a life cycle of how we see HR and recruiting. But beneath the water, there are so many things that need to be managed and need to be managed properly. Starting with mission and values, all those HR branding, all those strategic planning, budgeting, finance, all those recruiting prognoses for several months or even a year before. Building all those recruiting processes, all those evaluation, team building, including into the ecosystem, taking part in the events like this. Know the rivals and conducting the benchmarking, making all those structures and organizational design, and so on and so forth. It is a very complex thing, and we need to think about it as a complex thing. But how would we do this if we do not trust our HR manager to do complex things? I found that it is a big problem that HR managers and talent managers, they are not trusted. My idea was because they do not play games. They do not play games of the company they work at. They do not know how the games are done and what is the basic development process. They do not know the roles deeply inside the structure. They do not know who does what to make the game successful. The next thing, that deadly sin is that they do not know the industry well. And adding to that, it may be not even a professional in HR. It can be pathetic. You can read the results of the research I held in spring, and I really found that many specialists do not play games at all, and they do not play games of their companies. And what's even worse, they are poorly managed. You see, these are perversions of management. Who was the head of the HR department? Game producer or project lead? Okay. QA director? Seriously? Chief marketing officer, lead tech artist, PM, CTO? No. The head of HR is the CEO. the CEO of the company. He manages people. It's the main active of the company creating games. And the other horrible thing is that talent managers do not influence strategy. 20% of them do not influence strategy at all. I included the basic strategy of the company, the recruiting strategy, the employer branding strategy, the HR strategy, none of this. And we also counted employers' net promotion score. It's the thing when you measure, like on Booking.com, how probable is that you recommend our company to your friends and family, and you just put from 0 to 10. So this is the same for the employees, like how probable is this that you recommend our company? And the maximum is 10. You see that the average ENPS was above 8, so it's very high. It's higher than most of the specializations in the company. But you see that 20% do not influence any strategy at all, and they're happy with it. And they have the average ENPS of 7.2. So they do nothing, they are nothing in a strategic perspective, and they're happy with it. What should be done? You can now make a short checklist whether you are a recruiter, whether you are a C-level manager, whether you are a regular member of the team, whether your recruiter is doing well. And if he does all those things listed, like competing companies database, candidates database, forecasting, he writes good letters, he builds processes, he has search strategy for each vacancy, he negotiates with the candidate and with the hiring management, he does analytics and shares analytics, and so on and so forth. And he really is interested, and he feels that you are the inner client, you're his client, and he wants to satisfy you most. Then he is a good recruiter. But there are so little good recruiters here in game dev. If your recruiter doesn't match all of these points, please tell him that he needs to learn and to develop. Recruiting is a bit easier than HR, and I didn't include all of the things and HR, like as a role, maybe not one HR management, but maybe an HRD should run. Of course, it's planning and budgeting, it's structures, it's mission and values, and your corporate culture, the way you communicate it, it's the way you greet people, the way you onboard them, adapt them, how you plan the probation period, how you help all the team, the newcomer and his bosses, to have this process smooth. Running all those internship programs, team buildings, all those individual plans of development, developing and integrating and implementing a very complicated thing like evaluation system and all those degrees and so on and so forth. All those system of one-to-one meetings and giving feedback. It is also very important to dismiss people right. And there needs to be a procedure and the process of escorting this ex-employee for him to remain quite loyal to the company even after he leaves, and so on and so forth. There are so many things that a good HR needs to do. Please, if there are some blank things in your company, tell your HR manager that he needs to do some other stuff. But if you don't have an HR manager, and it happens very often, Some say we don't need an HR manager because we had a very bad experience or something else and there are no professionals. If you don't have an HR, it doesn't mean that you don't have HR processes in your company. Anyway, one way or another, you hire people, you adapt them, you develop them, you try to retain them, evaluate, motivate, and build the team and dismiss them. Even if you don't have a specific person in your team to do all of this, this doesn't mean that you should do this wrong and everybody needs to understand you because you don't have an HR manager. You need to optimize and have an understandable, maybe very brief procedure and process for each of these things. But you need to set up the rules, how you run it in your own team, even without an HR manager. I'm frequently asked, yeah? When do we need an HR? And in the team, never. Of course, never. It's it's stupid to have when it's like less than 10 people to have an HR there. From 10 to 30, yeah, you can somehow handle, but only if you understand that someone needs to be in charge of this process. You can do it without a specialist, but you can't do it without proper processes yourself. You can do it good. If you have over 30, but I sometimes say over 20, because 20 is quite a more complicated structure than 10, of course. You need an HR manager, but it needs to be a professional. If you have an office manager, you, of course, can grant him some recruiting role, answering questions and so on, but don't call him HR manager. If you call an office manager an HR manager, it doesn't mean that he will become a professional that very day you did this. If we speak about a bigger company, I count this way. One recruiter for 3 to 5 types of vacancies a month. And if we speak about an HR, it is really good that you have one specialist per at least 50 people. Some companies hire one HR for at least 30 people in order to run all of those complex things. I cannot imagine that a good, even the best professional can run all of this stuff alone. It's impossible. So what I want to say is that the HR and recruiting role is very important for the game development industry because this is, people are the most important here. But all those good girls need to develop into good professionals. And if you see that your recruiter is a copy-paste manager, that your HR manager is an event manager and not the best one, that the top management and C-level is not into HR processes, you need to change it. You need to grow your company and you need to grow your HR and recruiting processes. This very small and local impact needs to grow into the strategy and into the strategic impact and strategic management. Make HR and people management part of your product strategy. Because to create good games, you need to have good people who do this. Games. Your HR managers must play games. And they must play games that are created within the company. And they must know the industry. And they must know the way the games are done. And they need to have friends or pals between all the specialities that are in game dev. Either it is traffic or QA, artists, developers, game designers, producers, and so on. He needs to know the pain of each specialization. And what's the most important, you should not be happy with what you have now. as a C-level manager, as a team member, or as a talent manager. You need to constantly improve your HR abilities and skills. If you have any questions about HRs or want to share your pain about them, you are free to share. Thank you.